is a way to survive your last days on active duty. I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, live from my improvised studio in Germany. So those of you who notice a decreasing quality, well, sooner or later my stuff's going to get here. But what I wanted to talk to you today about was a question that an old friend of mine asked. He said, what are the last 60 to 90 days on active duty like before retirement? And before I tell you what I told him, let me remind you that military retirement is simply like any other military operation you've been a part of. And you have trained for decades to be a successful member of a military team doing those kinds of operations. That means that you have tons of experience dealing with overwhelming conditions and uncertainty. And there's two particular skills that you've honed over the years that are going to be valuable during your retirement process. Those are recon and triage. Now, the reason that this is important is because even 2 years after I took off the uniform, when I look back on those final days, I experience a tightening of my chest. I recall those final weeks as being absolutely filled with paperwork and deadlines and major decisions, and all of it being administered by people who could, by and large, never really give you a straight answer to your questions. And let me say, I had it pretty good. I was retiring on my own timeline, I had the support of my leadership, and my replacement was fully on board and had already started running things. Some of the folks that I have helped over the years, especially E6s and E7s, well, they have none of that going for them, and they still have to face those same challenges. That's why it's important to recognize that retirement is just another military operation. And the fact of the matter is that your service, the Army, the Air Force, what have you, they have been feeding you a steady diet of overwhelmingly complex and stressful military operations pretty much since the day you stumbled off the bus at basic. And you are good at handling it. That's why you've been successful throughout your whole career. So it's going to pay to use the skills you've acquired over your whole career to deal with what is just the next challenge that the military throws at you. And that is where those two timeless military concepts of recon and triage are going to come in handy. Number one, recon is a step in the troop leading procedures for a reason. You never want to make contact with an adversary on terrain that you're unfamiliar with. But how do you recon during retirement? Well, you can go to transition assistance classes, and that's kind of like doing a map recon. You get an overview, but you don't physically put yourself on the ground. You can talk to folks who've been through the process, and that's a bit like collecting lessons learned. But just like a real operation, nothing beats physically walking the terrain. You want something to go smooth at an office or a particular step in the process? Well, what you do is you go there in person and you ask, hey, what can I do to make sure that there's no problem or that everything works out? It's been my experience that most people do not want a confused, angry, frustrated sergeant major just flailing around their waiting room, and as a result, they're willing to do a little bit of pre-combat inspection to make sure that things are in order. And just being able to put a name and a face to that big boogeyman problem that you're going to have to deal with, well, that in and of itself can help lower your blood pressure. The second concept that you're going to leverage is triage. Urgent, important. If there's time, I'll get to it. And you can call this prioritization if you want, but at least in my experience, those last dwindling days of time on active duty, they felt more like a mass casualty event than like the cold, rational calculation of priorities. You are just going to have things pouring in at the last minute, and people are going to be saying stuff like, oh, you got to do this, or you better not forget that. And listen, you are going to have to look some issues dead in the eye and say, listen, if it doesn't get done, it doesn't get done. And while you're doing all that recon, a good question to keep asking is, like, how reversible is this decision? What if I delay the decision? What if I don't make a decision at all? In fact, I'll give you a tip about that whole survivor benefit program. There is a way to get yourself out of the program once you're off active duty if you decide that you didn't want to be in it in the first place. But you do have to make the decision to opt in order to be able to make that change. Oh, and maybe it's just me, but all those little what's-its and doodads for your retirement ceremony, those can be a needless distraction because like 3 months after you're retired, are you really going to care about whether or not you got a presidential letter? And now that you've stuck with me this far, let me suggest this one last, maybe important point about the military operation that is your retirement. You are going alone. It's your mission. You plan it. You execute it. You evaluate it. When the flag comes down on your last day on active duty, the Army is going to go rolling along with neither a thought nor care about you, just as it should be. But that means don't let somebody else dictate to you what they think your retirement should look like. And look, it might be a bumpy ride. It might not be the most well-oiled operation you've ever been a part of, but you are in charge, and I know that you've got this.